It had been an exhausting day, and the scorching Arizona sun showed no mercy. The relentless heat had sapped every ounce of energy from my body as I stood helplessly by the roadside, my car refusing to start no matter how many times I turned the key. I had already called for a tow truck, but the estimated wait time was over an hour. With no shade in sight and my phone battery dwindling to a mere 5%, I felt truly stranded. The only company I had was the occasional car speeding past on the highway, none of them bothering to stop. Then, out of nowhere, a large, rusted pickup truck rolled to a stop beside me. The window lowered, revealing a man who looked to be in his mid-40s. His tanned skin and rugged appearance suggested a life spent under the sun. He flashed a friendly smile, revealing a small gap between his front teeth. "You need some help?" he asked, his voice carrying the unmistakable twang of someone who had spent his life in the Southwest. I hesitated. Every warning my mother had ever drilled into me about talking to strangers rang loudly in my mind. But the heat was brutal, and the thought of standing out there for another hour made my stomach twist with unease. "Yeah," I finally admitted. "My car won't start. Tow truck's taking forever." He nodded toward his truck. "I got some tools in the back. Maybe I can take a look." Relief washed over me, and I took a cautious step toward his vehicle. As I opened the passenger door, expecting to wait while he grabbed his tools, something odd caught my attention. The keys were still in the ignition, but the truck wasn't running. And yet, the air inside was cool, as if the AC had been blasting moments ago. I turned to ask him about it, but before I could, he climbed in and shut the door behind him. For a long, uncomfortable moment, we just sat there in silence. The only sounds were our quiet breaths and the distant hum of passing cars. A creeping tension settled in my chest. "You seem nervous," he finally said, his hands resting on the steering wheel, but he made no move to start the truck. I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the door handle. "Should I be?" A small chuckle escaped him, a short exhale through his nose. "I guess that depends on whether you believe in fate." Chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" He turned his head, his gaze locking onto mine. His eyes were unreadable, not threatening but filled with something I couldn't quite place. "What if I told you that you were meant to get in this truck today? That everything leading up to this moment, your car breaking down, the unbearable heat, me passing by at just the right time, was all supposed to happen?" A shiver traced its way down my spine. "That sounds ominous." His lips curled into a slow smile, but this time it held something deeper, something knowing. "Or maybe," he said, "it's just life unfolding the way it's meant to." I stole a glance at the door handle, quickly calculating how fast I could get out if I needed to. My pulse pounded in my ears. "So, are you actually going to help with my car or not?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. He nodded, but there was a pause before he spoke again. "I will," he said finally. "But first, I need you to trust me." The way he said it sent a cold shiver through me. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. Challenge. I could have bolted. Could have rushed back to my car, locked the doors, and waited for the tow truck. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But something I couldn't quite explain, kept me in that seat. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe, just maybe, it was fate. Taking a deep breath, I loosened my grip on the door handle and let my shoulders relax. "All right," I said. "Let's see where this goes." And just like that, everything shifted. What followed was an unexpected exchange of stories, a connection forming between two strangers who, under any other circumstances, would have never crossed paths. His name was Jake. He told me he had spent most of his life fixing up cars and driving trucks across the country. He spoke with a mix of nostalgia and regret, as if the years had slipped by too quickly, leaving him in a place he hadn't quite expected. Despite my initial hesitation, I found myself listening intently, drawn into his words. In return, I shared bits and pieces about myself, How I had been on my way to visit my sister in Phoenix when my car decided to betray me. Minutes turned into an hour. The sun dipped lower, casting golden streaks across the horizon. Finally, Jake reached into the back seat, pulling out a well-worn toolkit. "All right," he said, pushing open the door and stepping out. "Let's see if we can get you back on the road." I followed him, watching as he popped the hood of my car and leaned over to inspect the engine. He worked with practiced ease, muttering under his breath as he checked different parts. I couldn't help but admire his skill, the way he navigated a problem I wouldn't even know where to begin. After a few minutes, he straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Looks like it's your battery," he said. "It's not completely dead, but it's struggling. I can give you a jump, but you'll need to replace it soon." Relief washed over me. "Thank you. Seriously. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." He shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Sometimes you just gotta be in the right place at the right time." As he hooked up the jumper cables, I realized how different this moment felt compared to when I first climbed into his truck. The tension had melted away, replaced by something else. Gratitude. Jake wasn't a threat. He was just a guy who had stopped to help. And somehow, in the short span of time we had spent together, we had shared something rare, an honest human connection. After a few minutes, my car roared back to life. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Jake unhooked the cables and closed the hood. "You're good to go," he said. "Just don't turn it off until you get somewhere safe." I nodded, but an odd sense of disappointment settled in my chest. "I owe you one," he chuckled. "Just pay it forward." I smiled, climbing back into my car. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Jake stood by his truck, hands on his hips, watching me drive off. The road stretched ahead of me. But for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like I was just moving forward. I was going somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, fate had a hand in it after all.